Airport staff ripped two black sisters' tickets. Minute later, their billionaire dad shut Airline. "You two are not getting on this plane." The words didn't just echo through gate C-14. They cut through the air like glass shattering. Passengers waiting to board flight 271 froze mid-conversation. A man holding a coffee stopped halfway through a sip. A mother pushing a stroller slowed to a halt. Even the low hum of airport announcements seemed to fade for a moment. Because the person standing at the counter shouting wasn't speaking to adults. She was shouting at two little girls. Two black twin girls. About 10 years old. They stood side by side in front of the boarding desk. Small pink suitcases beside their legs. Both wore identical pink dresses, soft and bright under the fluorescent lights of the airport terminal. Their hair was styled the same way, too tight, curls pulled up into high puff ponytails that bounced slightly whenever they moved. From a distance, they looked like mirror images. From up close, they looked like children who had just been publicly humiliated. The airline employee, tall, blonde, mid-30s, held two torn pieces of boarding passes in her hand. Then she did something that made several people in the boarding area gasp. She ripped the tickets again. The sound of paper tearing was sharp and ugly. Two halves became four. Then the pieces fluttered downward, drifting slowly through the air before landing on the polished airport floor. Right between the twins' shoes. "You don't belong on this flight." The employee snapped again, her voice loud enough for half the terminal to hear. The older twin didn't cry. She didn't yell either. She simply looked down at the shredded ticket pieces, then back up at the woman behind the counter. Her eyes were calm. Too calm for a child who had just watched her plane ticket get destroyed. The younger twin tightened her grip on the small phone in her hand but stayed silent. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Travelers who had been minding their own business started watching. A man in a business suit slowly raised his phone. Not to text, to record. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to the twins. The airline employee leaned over the counter with a look that mixed irritation with something colder. "You kids think you can just walk up here with fake tickets and get on a plane?" she said. "Not today." Behind the counter, a digital sign glowed overhead. C-14. Boarding Group B. Passengers shifted awkwardly. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. But nobody stepped forward. Not yet. The older twin bent slightly and picked up one of the torn pieces from the floor. The edge of the paper was jagged where it had been ripped apart. She studied it for a second. Then she looked back at the employee. "Ma'am," she said quietly. "Our dad bought those tickets." The woman behind the desk laughed. Not a friendly laugh. A short, dismissive one. "Oh, really?" she said. "Well, then maybe your dad should be here." Things were money. She crossed her arms. "Because right now, you two aren't flying anywhere." The younger twin finally glanced up at her sister. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No panic. No tears. Just a silent exchange that seemed strangely confident. The younger one lifted the phone slightly. Her voice was small but steady. "Should we call Dad now?" The older twin didn't hesitate. She nodded once. "Yeah," she said softly. "Call him. Free one. One by loving." Neither of them noticed that 3 different passengers had already started filming. And none of the airline staff behind the counter realized something else. Because 7 minutes from that moment, the entire airline system across the airport would suddenly stop working. The younger twin tapped the screen. The call connected almost instantly. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She simply lifted the phone closer to her ear while the noise of gate C-14 swirled around them. Rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, the distant roar of jet engines outside the glass windows. Then she spoke. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Dad." Her voice was calm, almost casual. The airline employee behind the counter rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, great," she muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Now we're calling Daddy." A few people chuckled uncomfortably, but the little girl kept speaking. "They said our tickets are fake." A pause. The older twin watched her sister carefully, arms folded over the small handle of her pink suitcase. "They ripped them," the younger one added. Another pause. This time longer. The kind of silence that feels heavier than words. The airline employee leaned forward across the counter again, clearly enjoying the attention she was getting from the growing crowd. "Listen, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Whoever you're pretending to call isn't going to change the fact that you two don't belong on this flight." Behind the twins, More passengers were starting to gather. The man in the business suit was still filming. Now a college student sitting near the window had her phone out too. Even a couple standing in the priority boarding line had turned completely around to watch. Something about the scene felt wrong. Two little girls, matching dresses, standing alone at a boarding gate, and a grown adult shouting at them. The older twin crouched slightly and began collecting the torn ticket pieces from the floor. She placed them carefully into the side pocket of her suitcase like they were something valuable. Meanwhile, the younger twin was still on the phone. "Yeah," she said quietly. "We're at gate C14. Another pause. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the airline employee. She said, "We're not getting on the plane." Across the counter, the employee shook her head and laughed again. "This is unbelievable," she said to a coworker behind her. "Kids these days really think they can get away with anything." But the coworker didn't laugh back. Instead, he leaned forward slightly toward the computer screen in front of him. Something on the display seemed to catch his attention. Melissa?" he said quietly. But Melissa, the airline employee, was too busy performing for the crowd. She crossed her arms again and looked down at the twins with exaggerated impatience. "You know what?" she said. "Security's going to handle this." That word traveled fast. Security. A murmur moved through the small crowd that had formed near the gate. The younger twin nodded slowly as she listened to the voice on the phone. "Okay," she said. "We'll wait." In the sectional line. Then she pulled the phone slightly away from her ear and looked at her sister. "He asked which gate," she said softly. The older twin nodded. "I told him," the younger one added. At that exact moment, something subtle changed behind the counter. The coworker who had been staring at the screen leaned closer to Melissa. "Hey," he whispered urgently. "You might want to check this." Melissa frowned. "What?" But before he could answer, every computer screen at gate C14 flickered. Once. Twice. Then the boarding scanner beside the counter made a sharp electronic beep, and the monitor went completely black. A second later, the overhead departure board above the gate refreshed. Passengers watched as the flight information suddenly disappeared. In its place, a single line of text appeared. "System connection lost." The coworker stared at the screen. Melissa blinked. "What the play-in?" But before she could finish the sentence, her desk phone began to ring. The ringing cut through the confusion like a knife. Melissa stared at the desk phone. It kept ringing. Once. Twice. 3 times. Around the gate, passengers were already whispering. What just happened? Did the system crash? Why are the screens blank? The coworker beside Melissa was still staring at his monitor, tapping keys that no longer did anything. "It's not responding," he muttered. The boarding scanner sat lifeless on the counter. Its screen dark. No boarding groups. No passenger list. Nothing. Melissa picked up the phone with an annoyed sigh. "Gate C14," she said sharply. For a moment, she didn't speak again. Her expression shifted slightly. Then she frowned. "What do you mean system override?" The coworker turned slowly toward her. "Override?" he repeated under his breath. Melissa covered the phone with her hand. "They're saying corporate locked the system." "Corporate?" the coworker whispered. "That makes no sense. And this is the help and stand in me way." Meanwhile, just a few feet away, the twins stood quietly beside their small suitcases. The younger one had already ended the call. Both girls were simply waiting, watching. The older twin glanced up at the departure board overhead. The word "system connection lost" glowed bright against the dark background. Passengers were now openly talking. A man in a leather jacket stepped closer to the counter. "Is the flight canceled?" he asked. Melissa ignored him. Her voice had become tighter now. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said into the phone. "We're in the middle of boarding." Another pause. This time, her face changed completely. "What?" "Things." The word came out quieter, almost cautious. Her coworker leaned closer. "What are they saying?" Melissa didn't answer. She was listening again. Then her eyes slowly drifted away from the counter, toward the twins, standing there in their matching pink dresses. The older twin met her gaze calmly. Not smug. Not scared. Just steady. Melissa turned slightly away from them as she spoke into the phone again. "Yes," she said slowly. "There are 2 kids here." Passengers nearby fell silent again. The man filming lowered his phone slightly but kept recording. Everyone wanted to hear what was happening now. Melissa's voice dropped further. 2 girls, she repeated. Her coworker swallowed. Melissa. But she kept listening. Then, she said something that made several people in the crowd glance at each other. Yes, they're tickets. Another pause. Longer this time. Her expression drained of color. You want me to do what? Across the counter, the older twin tilted her head slightly. The younger one leaned closer to whisper to her sister. Is he mad? She asked softly. The older twin shook her head. No, she said. He's not mad. She looked back at the airline employee. He's just fixing the problem. White is all. Behind the counter, Melissa's grip tightened around the phone. Her voice came out strained. Yes, sir. They're here. Passengers leaned closer. Even the coworker was holding his breath now. Melissa nodded slowly. Yes. Another pause. Then she said the words that froze the entire gate. Yes, Mr. Carter. The name hung in the air. Mr. Carter. A few passengers exchanged puzzled looks, but the coworker's eyes widened instantly. He turned back to the computer screen like he was suddenly remembering something important. Melissa swallowed. Yes, sir, she said again. I understand. I understand. She lowered the phone slowly. The entire gate was watching her now, waiting. And for the first time since this whole situation started, Melissa looked unsure of herself. Very unsure. Because the voice on the other end of that call had just told her something she hadn't expected. Something that made the system lock make perfect sense. She looked back at the twins again, then at the torn pieces of boarding passes still lying on the floor. And finally she spoke. Quietly. Security might not be necessary after all. The silence at gate C-14 felt different now. Not the awkward kind from before. This silence had weight. Melissa slowly placed the phone back on its cradle, but her hand lingered there for a moment as if she wasn't quite sure what to do next. Around the gate, passengers were watching every movement she made. Phones were still raised. The man in the business suit whispered to the person beside him. Did she just say Carter? The coworker behind the counter was no longer pretending to type. He was staring directly at the twins, then back at Melissa, then back at the twins again. Melissa, he said quietly, but she didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the older twin now. Something about the way the girls stood, their calm, patient, completely unbothered by the chaos, was starting to make Melissa uneasy. Most kids would have cried, or panicked, or begged. These two had done none of that. Instead, they had made a phone call, and now the entire airline system had just shut down. Passengers continued whispering. What's going on? Everyone a days to onsen. Did she really call corporate? No way two kids did this. My precedent maxed and we have intels de foreman. Behind the counter, the coworker suddenly leaned toward his monitor again. The screen had flickered back to life, but it wasn't the normal boarding interface. The background was dark. In the center of the screen was a message in bold white text. System access, temporarily restricted. Below it, a smaller line appeared. Executive authorization in progress. The coworker blinked. Melissa, he said again, louder this time. You need to see this. She turned slowly. What now? He stepped aside so she could see the monitor. Her eyes scanned the message. Then she leaned closer. What does that even mean? The coworker shook his head. I've never seen that before. A notification suddenly appeared at the bottom of the screen. Corporate control override active. Melissa felt her stomach tighten. That phrase meant only one thing. Someone from very high up had just taken control of the system. Across the counter, the twins watched quietly. The younger one shifted her weight slightly and tugged on the strap of her pink backpack. Is it working? She whispered. The older twin nodded faintly. I think so. I think so. Passengers nearby leaned closer. They could sense something was unfolding, even if they didn't understand it yet. One of the airport announcements echoed faintly through the terminal, but the usual boarding calls had stopped. Several departure boards down the concourse were now showing the same strange message. System update in progress. Melissa turned back toward the twins again. Her voice, when she spoke this time, was no longer sharp. It was careful. Who exactly did you call? She asked. The younger twin answered first. Our dad. Melissa forced a thin smile. Right? And what does your dad do? The twins exchanged another look. The older one shrugged slightly. He runs the airline. For a second, nobody reacted. Then a passenger near the front of the line laughed nervously. Sure he does. Another person chuckled. But the coworker behind the counter wasn't laughing. His eyes had widened again as he stared at the monitor. A new notification had appeared. Incoming call. Executive office. Melissa's desk phone began ringing again. Louder this time. More urgent. Everyone at the gate heard it. She hesitated. The twins didn't move. Passengers leaned forward. Melissa slowly picked up the receiver. Her voice was quieter now. Gate se pisprezecha. She listened, only for a few seconds. Then she straightened instantly. Her posture changed. Yes, sir, she said. The word came out almost automatically. Her coworker watched her face drain of color again. The passengers could only hear one side of the conversation, but the tone alone was enough. Whatever was being said on the other end. It was not a request. Melissa swallowed hard. Yes, sir, she repeated. I understand. I understand. Then she glanced at the twins again. And for the first time since this started, she looked nervous. Very nervous. The entire gate was silent now. Not the casual kind of silence you hear in an airport. This was the kind where everyone is waiting for the next thing to happen. Melissa stood behind the counter with the phone pressed tightly to her ear. Yes, sir, she said again. Her voice was smaller now. Much smaller than the one she used earlier when she had shouted at the twins. Passengers noticed the difference immediately. The confident tone she had before was gone. Completely gone. Of course. Sir, she continued carefully. Her coworker leaned closer, trying to hear anything coming through the receiver, but all he could catch was Melissa's side of the conversation. Yes, they're still here. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the two girls again, standing quietly with their pink suitcases. Watching. Waiting. And the tickets? The voice on the phone asked. Melissa swallowed. Yes, sir. They were torn. The words felt heavier as they left her mouth. A few passengers exchanged looks. Even without hearing the other voice, they could feel the tension growing. Melissa nodded quickly. And, sir? Another pause. Then she stiffened. No, sir. I didn't realize. Across the counter, the younger twin tugged gently on her sister's sleeve. What's happening? She whispered. The older twin didn't look away from Melissa. He's talking to them, she said quietly. He's asking questions. Behind the counter, Melissa's hand tightened around the receiver again. Yes, sir, she said. I understand. Her coworker leaned closer. What's going on? He whispered urgently. Melissa ignored him, because the voice on the other end had just become colder. Much colder. Listen carefully, the man said. Melissa straightened automatically. Yes, sir. Tenida. I want you to look at the two girls, standing in front of you, for state Maya Vi. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Melissa lifted her eyes. The twins were still standing there, side by side, matching pink dresses, matching backpacks. Calm. The man on the phone continued. Those are my daughters. Melissa felt something drop in her stomach. A passenger near the counter whispered under his breath. Wait. But the voice on the phone wasn't finished. You ripped their tickets. Melissa opened her mouth slightly. Yes, sir, but I won. The man cut her off instantly. Tak to do. Not even where. One word. Sharp. Controlled. The entire gate seemed to hold its breath. I'm not interested in excuses, the voice continued. I'm interested in understanding why two 10-year-old girls were humiliated at my boarding gate. Passengers stared openly now. Phones were raised higher. Even the coworker had stopped pretending to work. He was watching Melissa like everyone else. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Another pause. Then the man spoke again. Look at your screen. He stayed blind. Melissa turned slowly back toward the computer monitor. The message from earlier was gone. Now a new window had opened across the system. Large. Impossible to miss. Executive System, Access, Active. Below it, a name appeared. Daniel Carter. Chairman. CEO. The coworker inhaled sharply. Melissa. But she was already staring at it. The twins' last name. Carter. Passengers began whispering again. That name sounds familiar. To say heaven base a pattern? Who anyone and two? Isn't that we're live? Melissa's voice trembled slightly when she spoke into the phone again. Sir, I didn't know. The answer came immediately. That's exactly the problem. Melissa closed her eyes for a brief second. Then the voice added one final sentence. And this time, everyone near the counter heard it clearly. Now we're going to fix what you just broke. No one at Gate C14 moved. Not the passengers. Not the airline staff. Not even the twins. It felt like the entire terminal had paused to listen. Melissa stood frozen behind the counter, still holding the phone. The words from the man on the other end echoed in her mind. Now we're going to fix what you just broke. Her throat tightened. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Across the counter, the twins stood side by side, their small pink suitcases resting upright beside them. The older sister had both hands folded on the suitcase handle. The younger one gently swung her foot back and forth against the floor. They didn't look nervous. They didn't look angry. They just looked patient, like they were waiting for something they already knew would happen. Behind the counter, Melissa's coworker was still staring at the computer screen. More lines of text had appeared. Not the normal boarding interface. Not the passenger list. Something else entirely. Remote administrative control active. Then another line appeared underneath it. System audit initiated. The coworker blinked. Melissa, this isn't normal. She didn't answer, because the voice on the phone was speaking again. First, the man said calmly, I want every boarding gate in that terminal paused. Melissa swallowed. Dime. Yes, sir. Passengers looked up toward the overhead boards again. One by one, the departure screens began to change. Flights that had been listed as boarding now flashed a different message. Temporary boarding hold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Why are all the gates paused? What's happening? A flight attendant standing nearby pulled out her radio, confusion written across her face. But at gate C14, everyone already knew the answer. The man continued speaking through the phone. Second, he said, I want you to pick up those ticket pieces. Melissa hesitated. The request seemed strangely small compared to everything else happening. Sir, the tickets, he repeated calmly. The ones you tore. Slowly, Melissa looked down. The torn pieces of boarding passes were still scattered near the counter. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped out from behind the desk. Passengers instinctively stepped aside to give her space. The business traveler who had been filming whispered to someone behind him. This is insane. Melissa bent down. She picked up one piece. Then another. The paper edges were jagged where they had been ripped. When she stood up again, the twins were looking at her. Not with anger. Just with quiet curiosity. Like children watching an adult clean up a mess. Melissa returned behind the counter and placed the torn pieces gently on the desk. I have them, she said into the phone. Good. The man replied. His voice was calm, controlled, almost surgical. Now I want you to listen very carefully. It is not down or other way. And the help too thing. Melissa gripped the edge of the counter. Yes, sir. No. You're going to apologize to my daughters. Passengers leaned closer. Phones rose higher. Even the coworker straightened. Melissa slowly turned toward the twins. For several seconds she said nothing. Her earlier confidence, the loud voice, the mocking smile was gone. In its place was something else. Embarrassment. And a growing awareness that the entire gate was watching. The younger twin tilted her head slightly. Is she going to say sorry? She whispered to her sister. The older twin shrugged. Probably. Melissa took a breath. Then she stepped around the counter again until she was standing directly in front of the girls. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. I'm sorry. The younger twin looked up at her. For what? She asked. The question hung in the air. Melissa hesitated. The phone was still pressed against her ear. And the voice on the other end spoke again. Tell them the truth. Melissa swallowed. Then she said it. I'm sorry for tearing your tickets. The twins exchanged a small glance. And for the first time, since this entire situation started, the younger one smiled slightly. But the voice on the phone wasn't finished yet. Now, the man said calmly, we move to the next step. The apology hung in the air. Melissa stood there in front of the twins, the torn ticket pieces still resting on the counter behind her. Her phone remained pressed to her ear, the quiet presence of Daniel Carter still on the other end of the line. Passengers around gate C14 barely moved. Phones were still recording. No one wanted to miss whatever came next. The younger twin tilted her head slightly, studying Melissa with the simple curiosity only children have. For tearing our tickets? She asked again. Melissa nodded slowly. Yes. Yes. But the voice on the phone spoke again. Not louder. Not angrier. Just firm. That's not the full apology. Melissa froze. Around the gate, passengers exchanged glances. The coworker behind the desk whispered under his breath. Oh man. Melissa swallowed and spoke again, her voice shaking slightly now. I'm sorry for assuming your tickets weren't real. The younger twin looked at her sister again. The older twin finally stepped forward half a step. Not aggressively, just enough to be heard clearly. You also said we didn't belong on the plane. Had a vallis forminated. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered behind the camera of a raised phone. She's right. Melissa closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she opened them again and nodded. Yes. Another breath. I'm sorry for saying you didn't belong. The older twin studied her carefully. For a moment, the airport noise returned to rolling suitcases, distant announcements, the hum of people moving through the terminal. But at gate C14, everyone was still focused on the same small moment. The younger twin leaned toward her sister and whispered something. The older twin nodded slightly. Then she looked back up at Melissa. Okay, she said. The tension in Melissa's shoulders dropped just a little. But the voice on the phone was not finished. Good, Daniel Carter said calmly. Melissa straightened again immediately. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, he continued, step back behind the counter. She obeyed instantly. Passengers watched as she moved quickly to her position again. The coworker beside her looked like he had no idea where to put his hands. What's happening? He whispered. Melissa didn't answer, because the man on the phone had already moved to the next step. Look at your system. Melissa turned to the monitor. The screen refreshed again. New lines of information began appearing rapidly. Passenger records, flight manifests, security logs. But one window expanded larger than the rest. It filled nearly half the screen. Incident report, Gate C14. Melissa's coworker leaned closer. Oh no. In it. Below the title, text was already populating automatically. System audit, recording active. Then a second line appeared. Video evidence detected. Passengers glanced at one another. Several people instinctively lowered their phones. But it was too late. The older twin noticed the message too. What does that mean? The younger one asked quietly. Her sister shrugged. I think Dad is checking what happened. Behind the counter, Melissa stared at the screen in growing horror. The system wasn't just paused anymore. It was reviewing everything. Timestamps appeared. Boarding records. Audio logs. Then another notification appeared. HR department alerted. Melissa's coworker whispered again. This is bad. The voice on the phone spoke one more time. Melissa. Paisa. Yes, sir. If you are one. Actually, Don. You humiliated 2 children at my boarding gate. Melissa's fingers tightened around the counter edge. Yes, sir. And a visitor station. The man paused briefly. Then he said something that made every airline employee at that counter go pale. And now corporate is watching how we handle it. The words landed like a hammer. Corporate is watching. Melissa felt her stomach drop. Behind the counter, the coworker slowly leaned back from the monitor, as if the screen itself had become dangerous. You mean right now? He whispered. Melissa didn't answer, because the system answered for her. Another notification appeared on the monitor. Bright. Impossible to ignore. Live executive review active. Below it, a new window opened automatically. Several names appeared in a column. Corporate HR. Legal department. Operations control. The coworker's voice cracked. Oh my God. Oh my God. Passengers close to the counter were starting to notice the screen now too. What does that say? Executive review. A man filming stepped closer. This is going viral. He muttered. Across the counter, the twins watched quietly. The younger one tugged gently on the handle of her pink suitcase. Are we still getting on the plane? She whispered. The older twin shrugged slightly. I think Dad is making sure we do. Behind the counter, Melissa was still holding the phone. Her voice had become barely audible. Yes, sir. Daniel Carter's voice remained calm, controlled, but every word carried weight. Melissa. Melissa. Additional making side at 9. I want you to listen carefully. Passengers leaned closer. Even the coworker held his breath. You said something earlier. Carter continued. Melissa closed her eyes for a second. She already knew what he meant. You told my daughters they didn't belong on that plane. The words echoed across the silent gate. Melissa nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Now I want you to answer one question. Another pause. Passengers leaned in. What made you think that? Melissa's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Behind her, the coworker shifted nervously. Everyone already knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Carter's voice returned. Was it their tickets? Melissa shook her head slowly. No, sir. No, sir. Was it their behavior? No, sir. The silence stretched. Then he asked the final question. Or was it the way they looked? A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Someone behind a camera muttered quietly. Damon. Melissa felt every pair of eyes at gate C14 on her now. Passengers. Staff. Even the twins. The younger one was still watching her. Waiting. Melissa lowered her gaze. I made a mistake, she said quietly. Carter didn't respond immediately. When he spoke again, his tone was colder. "A mistake," he repeated. "Yes, sir." Behind the counter, the monitor refreshed again. Another notification appeared. HR action review pending. The coworker leaned closer. "Melissa." To Neverwation. But Carter continued speaking. "You embarrassed 2 children in front of an entire gate of passengers." Melissa gripped the counter. "Yes, sir." "You destroyed their tickets." "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." "And you told them they didn't belong." Her voice was barely audible now. "Yes, sir." Then Carter said something that made every airline employee at the counter go completely still. "Melissa." "Melissa." "Yes, sir." "We're not of why. Effective immediately. You're no longer authorized to represent this airline." The coworker's eyes widened. Passengers gasped quietly. Melissa Fraza. "What?" she whispered. The system confirmed it before Carter had to say another word. The screen flashed red. "Employee access. Revoked." Melissa stared at it. Her badge clipped to her uniform suddenly emitted a soft electronic beep. Then the terminal behind the counter logged her out automatically. Passengers watched the moment unfold in stunned silence. Across the counter, the younger twin leaned toward her sister again. "Did she just get fired?" she whispered. The older twin thought about it for a second. Then she nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think she did." But Daniel Carter still wasn't finished. The gate remained completely silent. Melissa stood behind the counter, staring at the screen that had just logged her out of the system. The red message, "Employee access, revoked," still glowed across the monitor. Her badge hung uselessly from her uniform. For the first time since the entire incident began, she no longer had access to anything in the airline's system. Not the boarding list. Not the passenger records. Not even the scanner. Behind her, the coworker slowly stepped back. He didn't know where to look. At the screen. At Melissa. Or at the 2 little girls standing calmly in front of the counter. Across gate C14, passengers were whispering openly now. Did she just get fired? That system locked her out. This is insane. Phones were still recording. Some people were already uploading clips. A man in the back of the crowd shook his head slowly. "I've never seen corporate move this fast." Melissa was still holding the phone. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "Sir, E. Dizalin." But Daniel Carter spoke before she could finish. "No. One word. Firm. Final. You've already said enough." You wanted to scream. Melissa lowered her head. "Yes, sir." "I makin." Carter paused briefly before continuing. His voice was calmer now, controlled, but still unmistakably authoritative. "My daughters are traveling today," he said. "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." "They will be boarding that plane." "Yes, sir." 5 or 1, and they will be treated with the same respect every passenger deserves. Melissa nodded silently. But Carter wasn't speaking to her anymore. His voice shifted slightly. "Is there a supervisor present at that gate?" The coworker's head snapped up. "Yes, sir," he blurted out instinctively. Melissa slowly handed him the phone. He grabbed it with nervous hands. "This is Kevin, Gate Operations Assistant," he said quickly. "Kevin," Carter replied. I'm Sir." "I need you to restore boarding at gate C14. Kevin glanced nervously at the screen. "I don't have access either, sir." "That will change in 10 seconds. 85. Almost immediately, the monitor refreshed again. The red employee lockout message disappeared. A new notification appeared. "Temporary admin access granted." Kevin's eyes widened. "Okay, yes, sir. I see it." "Good." Passengers watched as Kevin hurried back to the keyboard and began typing. Within seconds, the boarding system came back online. The departure board overhead refreshed. Flight 271. Boarding. A small cheer rippled through the waiting passengers. But Carter's voice continued calmly through the phone. "One more thing." Kevin straightened again. "Yes, sir. I want those 2 girls seated comfortably on that flight." Kevin glanced at the twins. They were still standing exactly where they had been since the beginning. Pink dresses. Pink suitcases. Completely calm. "Yes, sir," Kevin said. "I'll take care of it personally." Across the counter, the older twin finally picked up her suitcase handle. "See?" she whispered to her sister. "I told you Dad would fix it." The younger twin smiled. Kevin stepped around the counter and crouched slightly, so he could speak to them at eye level. "Ladies," he said gently, "your flight is ready." The younger twin looked toward her sister, then back toward the gate. "Thank you," she said politely. Passengers parted slightly as the twins walked forward toward the boarding scanner. Phones followed them. The older twin placed the reconstructed boarding pass pieces on the counter. Kevin quickly printed fresh ones. The scanner beeped. Access granted. As the twins stepped toward the jet bridge, the younger one turned back for just a moment. She looked at the quiet gate, at the passengers, at Melissa, standing silently behind the counter. Then she asked her sister softly, "Do you think Dad is still watching?" The older twin smiled. "Oh yeah," she said. "He's always watching. I'm as." And just like that, the two little girls walked onto the plane.